going on, guys? The day is finally here. I'm going to be putting my new suspension on the Honda Fit today. This is my 2007 Honda Fit. I'm here at work and we're gonna get rolling on it. I reached out to S3 and they granted me a partial sponsorship. So this is a sponsored video. I'm gonna show you guys what I got and we're gonna do a in-depth how-to on how to put these coilovers on the car and how to get the bump travel set up correctly on something with a beam axle. We're gonna get the car up in the air, start by measuring the original ride heights because I'd like to keep them about the same. And then we're gonna go over what parts I have. So here's what we got on the menu today. These are S3's newly updated coilovers for GD3 Honda Fit. The spring rates are gonna be 6K in the rear, 9K in the front, as well as Hone Development's Camber caster top hats. We're gonna get into a little bit more detail on these guys once we go to install them in the car. But for the rear bushings, I'm just using some polyurethane ones that I got with the Civic that I didn't end up using. And the honed top hats are going to be replacing the stock ones in the front. S3 was kind enough to give me a partial discount on these guys. Really grateful. We're gonna be doing a little bit of development with the car over this season. So I'm excited to see how these feel on the car. We're gonna get the car up in the air, get the rear all taken apart, all the coilovers removed, and we're gonna go over putting these things in the car and setting the bump travels. So we just got the Fit up on the lift. Tom is here helping. He's involuntarily part of this video now. Put it on jack stands in the back because there's no good place to pick up the car from the body in the rear, at least on the alignment rack that I'm on. So we can get the suspension at full droop. Front is just on the air jack for the alignment rack. So I think we're gonna drop the lift down just a little bit so we have a little bit more room. And we're gonna get the rear disassembled first. I think it's gonna be a little bit easier. We are going to install the shocks without the springs and check the bump travel. So the first step to getting these coilovers out of the car is to take off the dampening knob right here at the top. These coilovers, it's a 14mm. I already cracked it loose. Unthread it, bam. That reveals an Allen head. You may or may not need it to remove the coilover. I think this is a 19mm and we're just going to zip that off. The coilover will drop down and then we'll move to the bottom to grab it out. Grab the washer, bushing's gonna stay here because I can't reach it, and we're gonna repeat the same process on the other side. So up under the car, this is the 14mm bolt that holds it in. So I'm gonna rip this loose. I have the axle supported underneath with the air jack. Once I take this out, I'm gonna lower the axle down. The shock will come out as well as the spring. They're already pretty loose, so super easy to get these things out. Just one nut up top, one bolt at the bottom. Okay, now that the bolt is out back here, I'm just gonna lower this air jack. Whole suspension's coming down. There it is. Grab the springs out, set those guys aside, and we'll be able to yank the shock out, I think. Jesus, oh, there we go. Cool. So I'm gonna pull the sway bar out of the car just because it's going to affect the travel side to side because the axle in the Fit is a solid axle. I'm not 100% sure it's necessary. I'm just gonna do it. It's really easy, 6 bolts, and we'll have it out, and then I will check the travel without a sway bar, and then I will reinstall it before I put the springs in. Now I'm gonna see if I can get it out. All right, remember how I did that? We'll have to look at the footage. I'm gonna label this too so I know which side's the top. So before we put these rear shocks in the car, we're just gonna double check that the shock is threaded the same amount, just so I don't have to get confused. These are 13 inches, no, not 13 inches, 13 centimeters to the edge of the aluminum portion. These are the same. We're gonna throw these up in the car. Hopefully these bushings will work. There won't be a ton of play or slop or anything like that, but if that is the case, I do have stock bushings that I can use. So we're gonna get these guys up in the car and we'll get back to you when that's done. All right, I got the shock right here. I'm gonna face the logo towards the rear of the car. Doesn't matter, but I'm gonna shove this thing up through the hole in the body and Tom is going to put the bushing and thread it down by hand. Then we're gonna get the bottom set and tighten it up. I'm just gonna use the air jack to lift up the rear axle, try and get the bushings all lined up. and loosely thread in the bolts. I gotta tighten these at ride height, so I'm just gonna give them a little bit of snugness. We're almost there. A little tough doing both at once, but gonna use one of these $7 Harbor Freight lineup bars to try and get this thing straight into the knuckle, or not the knuckle, into the rear axle. There we go. Just gonna give it a little zip. Come on. There we go. Leaving it loose a little bit. Then I'm gonna come over here and struggle with the other side. All right, now that we've gotten the lower portion of the shock installed, I'm just gonna rattle these guys down. I'll check them with a torque wrench once I get the car all finished putting together, but there we go. We're gonna get back under the car and we're gonna throw a wheel on and check the droop travel. So we're gonna be using one of Tom's wheels today because I was supposed to bring the wheels that I normally run on track on the Fit here, but I forgot them and I didn't want to drive all the way home to go get them. These are 15x7 plus 35 with a 205 50-15 Continental Supreme or Extreme Contact 02. Pretty solid tire and wheel combo. Pretty similar in total width and diameter to what I normally run. I normally run a plus 35 with a AO52 on them. We're gonna use that for clearance and to measure the bump and droop travel on this car. But I'm gonna throw it on the car and we're gonna check and make sure this thing doesn't hit the bodywork before it hits the bump stop.
That's gonna look really interesting, a gold wheel on a silver Fit.
It's like rich. Okay, now that we've got the wheel bolted on, we're gonna jack this thing up as far as it'll go with a floor jack, which I'm gonna go grab, and we're gonna make sure that it hits the bump stop of the suspension before the tire comes in contact with the car. This thing doesn't have camber shims in it yet. I'm gonna have to redo all this once I put camber shims in it, but I just wanna get a general idea of where we're at so far. So I got a floor jack under the tire. We'll see if this stays under here. I have the parking brake on. I'm just gonna jack up the tire until it is at full compression and see where the tire is gonna end up. I'm doing this on only one side because I wanna know how it's gonna behave like that under compression on just one side. Okay, so right there, it's touching the rear. That is super dumped. So we're gonna raise the bump stop by unthreading the shock body in the lower cup. I'm probably gonna go like an inch and then see where we're at with that. And I'm just gonna match every adjustment that I make on the other side. What I'm gonna do to move the bump stop upwards is I'm going to loosen this lock ring right here, and I'm gonna raise the shock by unscrewing it counterclockwise so that the bump stop is higher up. I'm gonna go an inch, that might be too much. So I'm gonna put just a paint pen mark right here on the threads. I'll spin them up a little bit, and I'm just gonna measure from the paint mark to the cup of the coilover with these digital calipers. So these should be pretty easy to spin around, yep. So I'm just throwing the wheel back on. We raised the shock in the body 12 millimeters. Gonna get this guy screwed in, and we're gonna check the bump height again. I think that we're gonna have to adjust a little bit more, but we're going in the right direction. We had lots of doubt about which way we were doing it correctly, even though I filmed a video about the same time last year on doing this on my Civic, so maybe I should listen to my own advice. Oh, there we go. That is at full bump. So we need to come down like, yeah, that's full bump right there. We need to come down like another probably 20 mil and we should be good. So we're gonna take the tire off once again, get all that figured out, and then we will repeat the process on the other side. So we've had to move the suspension upwards quite a bit. So we're using one of these rubber strap wrenches because it's way easier than sticking your hands in here and trying to twist it. So basically you just run this thing around, put it all together, and then you can just go for it. I gotta do 5 rotations on this coilover. Bam. Let's get the wheel on. After I measure the height, should be good to go. Yeah, they're about the same. All right, let's get the wheel on and check the bump height. We are right on the bump stops with the tire just barely contacting the fender. We have a little bit to go. I may just roll the fenders a little bit more, but gotta watch for the bumper clearance, but we're getting there. I'm probably gonna run it up 3 more and see how it ends up. So we raise the suspension 3 full turns, take a look, see where we contact. Okay, there we go. That clears just barely. I'm gonna roll the fenders a little bit, but I think that'll be good enough. I think some camber will help this. I'm gonna put shims on it in the future, but next we're gonna move on to setting the ride height.
What do you think about the gold wheel on the silver fit?
So before we get the ride height sorted, we're just gonna measure the height from the center of the hub to the fender at droop, and then we're gonna jack the axle all the way up and measure it at bump. And then we have a good ride height to shoot for. I'm probably not gonna be right in the middle of bump and droop just because this thing has a ton less suspension travel because it's probably gonna be pretty low. I wanna keep it off the fenders when I'm turning. I'm just gonna grab a tape, measure all that stuff, and then I'll tell you what our projected ride height should be. So at full droop, this is approximate, looking at about 386 millimeters. So I'll write that down. Now I'm jacking the axle up all the way, just on one side. It's jacking the other side up a little bit, but it should be the same because this is a solid axle. Right about, oh, still going, still going, still going. Right there, that is our bump height. And we're gonna measure right here, looks like 269 millimeters. So we need to find the middle of those 2 heights to do our ride heights at, which I don't think is gonna work perfectly, but I'm gonna get the car sitting in a place that I like, and then we'll see what the heights compare to the bump and the droop travel. This is the rear spring with the adjuster. There's an isolator at the bottom, then it goes spring, isolator, lock ring, adjuster, and then there's another isolator up top. The adjuster goes at the top of the car, as stated right here, and then they go up in the car. Boom. We will see if we can get these in here without having to take the shocks back out, or at least loosen them, but it's not looking good. So we're gonna get these in the car, and we'll get back to you probably while we're doing it. We're gonna attempt to just chuck these things up in here as is. Hey, look at that. Right in. Awesome. So I think to start off with, I'm just gonna put just a slight amount of preload on these springs, and then we'll probably have to lower the car onto the rack and see where it is and just kind of mess with it from there. But I'm not sure a good way to do that because we have the front on the jacks and we have the rear on jack stands. So we'll figure something out, but these actually go in pretty easily. So I'm gonna grab the other one and put it in. So we got the spring perches with the rear springs into the car. We're gonna move on to the front now so we can get the front of the car on the ground so we can set the ride heights, and then we're gonna set the ride heights on the rear next. I think that's gonna be the last thing we do just because the way we have it jacked up on the lift. So we're gonna start off by taking the old coilovers out. In my case, it's a 19 millimeter up here, 15 and 18 here for the lower eccentric bolt. And then upstairs it is a 19 millimeter as well. So we're gonna get that disassembled. Hopefully the impact gun will be able to break this loose. I have these super, super tight because they like to slip at the track. So, amazing. Look at that. And then the bottom side, nut is 18, bolt is 15, it's AC Delco part, that's why that is. It's got Chevy sizes on it, but eccentric bolt's an eccentric bolt. This is gonna definitely mess with the camber on your car a lot when you change your coilovers over. That's part of the reason why I'm doing this on the alignment rack. just so we can adjust right afterwards. I'm gonna get this fiddled out of here, get the ABS sensor unplugged, unzip tied, take the brake line off, and we'll move up top. To remove the top section of the coilover, same thing as the back, 14 mil, take the dampening knob loose, and it should reveal an Allen underneath, which is, I think it's 5 millimeter. Let's see if this guy will fit. It is. Need to grab a different socket. It's a little bit shallower, but this nut right here, 19 millimeter, I'm using this double offset wrench. Makes it a lot easier to get in there, to be able to loosen it. So I'm gonna go grab a different socket, and then it's kind of a two-person job to get this coilover out the bottom just so it doesn't drop and hit stuff. So we'll do that off camera, and then once we get the new stuff assembled, we'll film that. So here are the front coilovers for the fit. These are the Hone Developments top hats. These add a static degree of camber and caster. They're non-adjustable. They have their own sealed bearing inside of them. Pretty spendy, but I think they're gonna make a big difference on track. I'm gonna get these thrown on the coilovers with no spring so we can set the bump travel, as well as measure the shocks, make sure they're at the same length, which I can tell they're not right now. So I'm going to take the spring off. This is the left side. Spring comes off. This is just a nut that we're using because it normally has locking hardware. I don't want to mess the threads up on the shock. The way that this works is take this top plate off. These top hats are 4 pieces. You have a sleeve that goes on the top. This is where the bearing sits, and this is what you install first onto the coilover. It would normally sit on the spring, right like this, but since we're going to be installing these with no spring, I'm just going to place it straight onto the coilover like that. Next step is I'm going to put the bearing plate on. Left-hand side, coilover is labeled left front. And I'm going to put the sleeve on top of the bearing. I'm going to just hand thread this nut down for right now. I'll tighten it up off camera before we throw it in the car. And that should be good to throw in the car. There's a couple pieces you do need to put on the chassis itself before you install these coilovers, just so you don't scratch your car up. Once you have your bearing plate installed onto the top hat, it comes with these little rubber sticky boys. Just going to peel this guy off if I can while wearing gloves and stick it right on there like this. This surface is going to be contacting your chassis, and that's why it's got this rubber pad, just to make sure that it doesn't scratch anything up when you install it. So I'm going to set this aside, and there is a couple more of these guys. They go here and here if it's the other side. They're the same part, it's just flipped. So we're gonna have to determine which side this one goes on. And there's also these, which go on the chassis as well. We're gonna go to the car and I'll show you where those go. This is the little rubber isolator that goes in the car. On my phone here, it shows it going right underneath the hood hinge. I'm gonna get a pry tool and pop this up so I have a little bit more access. I'm pretty sure that it needs to stay like that just so that the camber plate has some clearance. So I'm gonna grab that and I'm gonna stick this guy down. I'm gonna peel this guy off and hopefully I don't mess this up. It needs to wrap around the chassis. But again, it's gotta kind of be pretty close to the hole. And it wraps around like that. I don't think that's perfect, but I think it'll work. Next, we're going to put the coilover up in the car and get the top plate tightened down. We're just getting an approximation of the total length of the shock. Looks like 155 millimeters here and quite a bit longer on the other side. So I'm going to adjust these shocks so that they're the same length, and then we will be all set. We're going to put the coilover up in the car, and then we're going to use these tabs to mount the coilover into the car. I got to figure out which way they're going to go, but they are the same part number. I just need to make sure that I apply the little rubber thing on the bottom, and then it's held in by 2 bolts. So Tom's going to hold the coilover up while I try and finagle it into place and get those bolts threaded down. So those 2 bolts up top are what retain the coilover into the car with that tab. This piece of trim right here might be in the way. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure if we're lined up all the way or not. So we're gonna get everything tightened down and see where it sits. If I think this is gonna be an issue, we may have to take it off and trim it, but we'll do that after I set the bump travel. We're gonna go to the other side of the car, repeat the same process, and then start setting bump travel. So we just installed both sides of the coilovers with no spring. We're going to now install the camber bolts back in the bottom and get everything buttoned up down there, just loosely. Check the bump travel once again. So we just got the suspension installed, just dialed in a static 2.1 degrees of camber at droop, just so we can check the bump travel. Sway bar disconnected. We're gonna put a wheel on it and we're gonna jack it up. Hopefully there's a good place to jack it up, or we're gonna have to put it in gear and try and do the same thing we did in the rear. Currently, the coilovers are set to the same height as far as the shock body goes. We're gonna get a wheel on this thing, jack it up, and see where we end up for the bump travel. All right, we are doing the same thing we did in the rear. We're doing it with the front. I think that it's gonna have a little bit more camber once I finalize the alignment, so I'm not super worried about a little bit of rubbing. This thing's already destroyed its fender liners, even with 3.5 degrees of camber on track. I'm gonna jack this thing up, see, ooh, hello? What's going on here? Oh, okay. We're gonna keep going. There's the bump stop, right there. Looks like we're chilling. Like, that's not bad. It'll rub a little bit under full compression, but I think that that was what you call a lucky guess. Let's go to the other side and see if it does the same thing. All right, let's see how this side goes. Should be adjusted the same amount. Yeah, we're miles off. We got tons of clearance. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I mean, if I have 2.5 or 3 degrees camber, I think we should be totally fine. So I'm gonna use this bump stop setting for now. I'm gonna lock the collars down. If I have an issue, I'll come back. I think this is acceptable enough for bump stop travel. Let's get these coilovers back out of the car, lock everything down. We're gonna put the springs on and we're gonna do ride heights next. So now that I more or less have the bump height set, I'm going to put the springs on the coilovers and we're gonna get them back in the car, and we're gonna check the ride heights, make sure that the bump travel and the droop travel are all set, and we will be good to go to align this thing. So I'm just gonna take this nut off on the end, put the spring on. I'm gonna set it with just a little bit of preload, put it in the car, see where the ride heights are at, and then we'll continue on from there. So the coilovers are all ready to go back up in the car. We're not gonna bother filming putting them back in the car. We already did that. Put the car on the ground, measure the ride heights on all 4 corners, and then we're gonna come up with a plan of what we need to do to get the ride heights where I want them, and then we will align, and we will be all finished. So the coilovers are back in the car using the factory locking nuts provided with Honed. I had to trim a little bit out of the cowl. I just used a hot knife, cut that out of there, just so this would sit a little bit better. We had some issues getting the camber plate to line up 100% without cutting that, so no big deal. But now we're gonna get this thing back together with the camber bolts in it. I lost a washer for the camber bolts, so we just got new camber bolts. They were pretty beat up anyways. So we'll get that all back together and we'll have it on the ground in just a second. We got the fit on the ground. Here's the ride height with the gold wheels. It's pretty even front to back. Doesn't look terrible. It needs to come down quite a bit, all 4 corners. I'm gonna take a look at what the previous ride heights of the car were. I'd like to get the rear a little bit lower in the back just because I have a little bit more spring rate and it's not gonna wanna rub as bad, but I think that what our next step is to get a measurement on all 4 corners from, I think we're gonna probably do, once again, center of the wheel to the fender and then just try and match them. But we got a little bit of work going up and down on the rack to do, but we're getting close. I think the ride heights are definitely acceptable, but they're a bit high, so we'll have to take care of that. Okay, so the plan is to drop this car about 20 millimeters on all 4 corners. Pretty significant drop. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take 15 mil out of the coilovers in the front. I'm just gonna measure, if I can, measure this distance. Nope, can't get it in there. Try and measure this distance. Right. There's too much stuff in the way. Right here, 83. And I'm just gonna shrink this down, 63 and some change. Put it in right here. I'm just gonna turn the coilover down until it touches. Yes, these springs are gonna be kind of loose in here. No, I do not care. They should center up, no problem. But I'm gonna leave them loose for this whole deal. And that should be it. I think that was 20 mil that I went actually, but we will see what the ride height's at. I'm just kind of doing stuff. Same thing on the other side, and then we will check the ride heights in the front. We will do the rears, and then we will see what happens and align the car. It's probably gonna take a little bit of messing around throughout this coming week to get the ride height set right. I'm totally fine with that. That's just how it goes. If you wanna have your suspension heights dialed, it takes a little bit of time, but so far so good. I'm gonna keep trucking on this. So we just brought the front height of the car down to 570 millimeters from the floor to the fender. Not the most precise measurement ever, but they're both even. We're gonna do the rear next. It's really high. We're shooting for 575 in the back. We want a little bit of rake, just because sometimes I pile this thing full of stuff. And yeah, gonna take quite a bit of time to do the rear because we have to put it on jack stands every time we wanna make the height change. We need to get it up in the air, mess with it, put it back down, get it up, put it back down. It's gonna be kind of a process, but we're getting close. I think that it's gonna raise the front a little bit once we change the rear height, but once we add a little bit more camber, it should lower it right back down. So everything should be about sorted. Ride height's looking pretty good. I think I just filmed this entire video in super view, which is whatever. It's gonna be kind of fish-eyed, but I just realized that. Next up, we're gonna get this thing on the alignment rack. Well, we already are on the alignment rack. We're gonna put heads on this thing, measure it. But before we do that, we're just gonna give everything a quick torque check and make sure that we're all good. We just finished up with the alignment. Here's how it sits right now, all finished up. I went with 2.5 degrees of camber in the front, a little bit less than I normally run. Steven suggested that I run a little bit less camber in the front for autocross, so we're gonna try that out very shortly. Non-adjustable in the rear so far. I'm gonna shim it soon, and that's gonna be interesting. Gonna do the rear beam bushings. We have one last step, and that is to put a couple stickers on the car. Thank you once again to S3 Suspension for sponsoring these coilovers, and thank you again to Honed for making some killer top hats. This is a super time-consuming process. It's like 9 o'clock at night. I'm here at work. We started at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I think that I'm going to be really happy with the results of these coilovers. I'm excited to drive on them, but yeah, I'm going to get these stickers on the car and we'll close the video out. All right, guys, so that's going to be it for this video. Thank you to S3 Suspension and Hone Developments for the parts. Thank you, S3, for sponsoring me. Shout out to Kevin. I can't wait to test these out at Autocross. These coilovers are going to be mainly Autocross focused, but they should be pretty damn good on track too. They definitely feel a lot stiffer than the last coilovers that were on the car, but I think that they're valved a lot better. So I think this is going to be really fun. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for the support, and thank you, Tom, for helping me this whole time. This has been like an 8 or 9 hour process messing around with this stupid car. So we're all set, and I will see you guys next time.